Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. We have Dr. Joe Goldstrich, the author of this new book, The Cannabis Cancer Connection. Many of our patients have asked about cancer treatment with cannabis, and it's remarkably effective. Dr. Joe will be discussing that. He also discusses being in the emergency room on November 22nd, 1963, when they brought in John F. Kennedy after his assassination. So we'll be discussing that, issue near and dear to my heart. But first, we're going to bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight, and only stories from Ohio. A majority of Ohio voters have this week approved a citizens-initiated measure, Issue 2, legalizing the possession, home cultivation, and retail sales of cannabis for those aged 21 or older. Because the proposed measure is a statutory question rather than a constitutional amendment, state lawmakers have the option of amending or even repealing its provisions. Prior to the vote, members of the GOP-led Ohio Senate passed a resolution urging voters to reject the initiative, and Republican Governor Mike DeWine spoke out against the measure. The state Senate leader has also expressed his desire to revisit provisions of the new law and propose legislative changes. As approved by voters, the law allows for the possession of up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana and 15 grams of marijuana extract by adults. Ohioans will be permitted to purchase marijuana at retail locations or grow up to 12 plants in their home. Retail cannabis products will be taxed at 10%, and sales are anticipated to generate over $400 million in annual cannabis tax dollars. A separate analysis estimated that the law will provide 3,300 new jobs in Ohio in the first year after legalization. Provisions in the law legalizing the possession and home cultivation of marijuana by adults takes effect on December 7th. The measure calls upon regulators to begin issuing retail licenses for sales of cannabis by late 2024. Ohio is the 24th state to legalize the adult use marijuana market, and it is the 14th to do so by a public vote. A majority of people in the United States now live where cannabis is legal. Additional information about Issue 2's initiative is available online from the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. We'll go to our interview in just a moment. We want to remind you that if you or a loved one are looking for a doctor to help you obtain a medical marijuana permit, then give us a call. Our number is 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. Thanks for watching, and help restore hemp. Good night. I'd like to welcome Dr. Joe Goldstrich, the author of an exciting new book called The Cannabis Cancer Connection. It's an honor to have you on, sir. I understand you worked with a friend of mine, Angela Baca, in helping you produce this book.
Well, she was a tremendous help. Not only did she edit, but she managed the whole production, and she's managing the marketing and the public relations. She's my everything. So
All right.
there would be no book without Angela Baca.
She has helped me a great deal. She wrote a number of articles about a corporate takeover that I experienced, and before that, she'd written some articles about me as well. But she's great. And so you are a cardiologist by training.
Yes, I'm a retired cardiologist. I retired a little over 10 years ago.
I see. And somehow you've been brought into the world of medical marijuana, and you've been studying it intensely, obviously, ever since.
Yes. I back around 2012 or so, I was depressed, and I remembered how good, how I felt when I used cannabis several years before, and so I tried some cannabis, and it cured my depression. And then about that same time, I saw I was getting bored with retirement, and that's really most of my depression was coming from that boredom. And I saw an opportunity for a clinic in California to issue medical cannabis cards. And so I took that job, and it lasted about 5 days because there really was no medicine involved. It was just people wanting to get high and get a card. And so I quit. And then
So it was
about
an irreputable place, really.
yeah, yes. I felt I was jeopardizing my medical license every time I granted a recommendation without the medical records, without the medical illness that was required. So I quit. And then a few months later, I saw another ad for a clinic in Oakland, and that was with Gene Talleyrand. I don't know if you know that name. He started the Medican clinics throughout California, and I talked to him, and I was convinced that it was going to be a legitimate operation, and so I went to work for his clinic in Oakland, and it was in fact a very legitimate operation, and I got to see about 3,500 patients that year, and they taught me everything that I know about how to use medical cannabis for such a wide variety and spectrum of conditions. But I didn't really know how to talk to the cancer patients. Um, and then a couple of years later, or maybe it was just a year later, there was a conference in Denver, and Maura Gordon presented two patients with brain cancer, and she showed the brain scans in her presentation and showed how cannabis had resulted in shrinkage of those brain tumors. And I knew at that moment that that's what I wanted to do. That's the aspect of cannabis medicine that I wanted to specialize in. And so from that point forward, I became interested and studied and pursued and began treating patients with cancer who wanted to use cannabis.
I know Mara Gordon. We've been speakers along with Dr. Sanchez at several events in Spain and Colombia and Chile. And she's been working on cannabis formulations for some time.
Yes.
And so what's the name of her business? It's Aunt Zelda or something like that?
That's what it was, but she's currently living in Mexico, and I'm not sure what her business involvements are at this time. I stay in touch with Mara, and but I'm not sure exactly what she's doing as far as oil is concerned. And
the whole market, of course, has changed with the regulation of adult use cannabis. It's a lot of those people who were illegitimate medical patients are no longer trying to obtain medical permits. And so the patients, what we saw in our practice and what doctors who worked with us and at the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation medical clinics, we always required medical records before we would even schedule an appointment. And so the doctors noted that the patients they saw were generally much more ill than the general patients they would see on a day-to-day business in their other practices. Was that your experience?
Not necessarily so. But I think the biggest travesty of adult use is that medical cannabis got thrown under the bus.
Yeah.
You can't get decent medicine in most dispensaries now. The choices are extremely limited. There's no CBG, very little CBD, no acid cannabinoids. A few dispensaries do cover those bases, but they're far and few between. And so I consult with some patients from, say, California, and then I go online and look at the dispensaries near them to see if they can get their medicine there. And more often than not, it's just not available. They have to reach out a little further from where they live in order to get what they need.
And I haven't completed reading your book, but you talk about how the entourage effect of various cannabinoids work on various types of cancer lines, and so and that multiple cannabinoids seem to be more effective than single cannabinoids.
Yes, that's my hypothesis. And I have some experience talking to people who have made oils with 7, 10, or more chemovars, and have had success with that. And I go even a step further. I think that if you use I got so many ideas in my head at once. So in Dr. Mary's research, Dr. Didi Mary from Israel, and I cite his work throughout the book,
Yeah.
he found that he had in his seminal study with 12 different extracts, he had one extract from one cannabis plant that was not effective against any of the tumors. So if you happen to get that chemovar, you're not going to be successful treating the cancer. So, and there are many minor cannabinoids that seem to have anti-cancer activity, and those are prevalent in various degrees in different chemovars. I don't use the word strain very often because it's not a technically correct, but it's a variety is a better word than strain in my opinion. But I sometimes slip and use the word strain. But anyway, I think that mixing multiple varieties of cannabis and making an oil from that. But I go one step further. So there are basically two kinds of solvents, polar and nonpolar. The polar solvents are things like alcohol. That's a major polar solvent. But other alcohols besides ethyl alcohol are also polar solvents. The nonpolar solvents are butane, hexane, and even CO2. Now, I cite a study in the book where they took a hemp variety and extracted it with a polar solvent and a nonpolar solvent. And then they put that extract on the tumor cells, and the polar solvent did not kill the tumor cells at all. Only the nonpolar solvent was effective. The oil that was made from the nonpolar solvent was effective in killing the cancer cells. So I also advocate, whenever possible, getting multiple cultivars and extracting with a polar and a nonpolar solvent and mixing that all together to create the medicine that's most likely to not miss the tumor, to be able to hit it and kill it. Now that most people have had success not doing all of that, using one variety of cannabis. A lot of people are successful, but in my experience, too many people that I've treated who did everything right failed and didn't survive. So part of my intention in writing this book was to try to find a better way to use cannabis to kill cancer.
I have never heard that before. I use ethanol myself in making it. I do blend as many varieties as I have, usually about 27 varieties in terms of creating my full extract cannabis oil. I know initially we were following the recipe from Rick Simpson with naphtha. Is that a polar solvent or a non-polar solvent?
I think it's a nonpolar solvent, but I'm not certain. But I certainly am not a proponent of naphtha as a solvent. Yeah.
We found that if we didn't remove it completely, that it caused bad reactions, and it
Yeah.
has to be completely removed. And that's hard to do in your, with outside of a laboratory. Let's put it that way.
Right. Now, I have in the book, I have I describe a patient with gastric cancer, and it's interesting because some of the preclinical research on gastric cancer suggests that THC may stimulate the growth of the cancer. Now, I didn't know that when I treated this patient back in 2016, and her son-in-law was an oil maker in Colorado, and he used butane to make his oils, which is a nonpolar solvent. So all of her medicine was made with a nonpolar solvent, whereas most medicines are made with ethanol, a polar solvent. And she was successful. She went to no evidence of disease with these butane extracts of both CBD and THC. And I believe she used some THCA also. I don't recall it precisely. So this is a successful case with just nonpolar solvent. Now, if you look, most of the preclinical research prior to 2018 was done with pure isolated THC, not a full extract. Cristina Sanchez was the first to use an extract that was made with alcohol, and it was a full full spectrum extract. It was actually Mara Gordon provided that extract for Cristina's research, and then in Dr. Mary's 2019 publication, he used full ethanol extract for his 12 cannabis varieties that he used in those experiments. I think we still have so much to learn about what's going to be the most effective way to use cannabis to treat cancer. Dr. Mary is working on finding specific compounds within the plant. There are over 500 different unique compounds in the cannabis plant. As of last year, there were 166 cannabinoids.
Yeah, I haven't heard 500 yet. 500. I mean,
over 500.
When I first started working with cannabis legalization back in the 70s and early 80s, we knew about 3, and then it went up to 12. Now I thought it was about 160, but now it's over 500.
Right, that includes the flavonoids, the terpenes, and other polyphenols. But Dr. Mary in his CanMed 2023 presentation cited the number 166 cannabinoids. Now, what his researchers do, he found that in one tumor type, only 3 cannabinoids were necessary to kill the tumor. That you had to have those 3, and that was all it took. And if you had more, it didn't make any difference. It didn't add or subtract from the outcome.
So those were THC delta 9, CBN, and CBD. Those 3.
No, one of them was a cannabinoid with a number which was 3318B or something like that. Was one of the 3, and I'm sure THC and
I know you covered cannabichromene and cannabigerol in your book, and their various uses on different cancer lines.
I think that I'm including CBG, cannabigerol, in almost all my cannabis cancer protocols now. It is an amazing cannabinoid that has not only extensive anti-neoplastic activity, but it's an amazing cannabinoid. It's a new kid on the block.
Yeah, it's the mother cannabinoid. When cannabis first starts producing unique cannabinoids, CBG is it, and then that develops into others. that right?
CBGA.
Ah,
Cannabinoid,
yeah,
the mother cannabinoid is CBGA. And in fact, when you get the raw plant, it's all in acid form.
right.
There is no THC, except, it naturally converts from THCA to THC. And you have to be careful, because I recommend THCA for certain tumors, especially prostate cancer. I include THCA in the protocol, because in Dr. Mary's research, there was a strain of prostate cancer, that a variety of prostate cancer that didn't respond to THC and responded much better to THCA. But so I sometimes tell people to take a flower, a bud, and throw it in a smoothie to get their THCA. But I tested that before I recommended it. And the first time I tested it, it was a disaster. That most of the THCA had been converted to THC naturally, and it was one of the most stoned that I ever got, unintentionally, of course. So you can, if you have really fresh cannabis, it's all in the acid form, and you can use a flower as a source of the acid. But there are tinctures that are made. Dustin Sulak has a line of medicine in the Healer line, which is only available in Maryland and Washington, D.C., and he has a THCA product. And my friend in Colorado, who now has changed his line of work when making the butane extracts, he had a THC product. But they're hard to find. And Mary's Medicinal has a product that has THCA. But other than those sources, you have to experiment and use a fresh flower to get your THCA. Some breast cancers are also sensitive to THCA, and many tumors are also sensitive to CBDA, which is just as hard to come by, but easier than THCA.
So the way cannabis acts on a cancer cell is that all cells have receptors for various compounds, and the cannabinoids seem to, different ones attach to those receptors and cause apoptosis or cell death in some of these cancer lines. Also, they stop the tumor's ability to find blood flow. I think you said it was a compound IDT or ID, what? 12?
ID1.
ID1.
ID1 is a gene that's prevalent in the body in newborns and young people, because the gene stimulates cell growth, and then as we get older, that gene is downregulated. So there's not much need for ID1 as you reach adulthood. But many tumors will reactivate the ID1 gene and use it to facilitate cell growth. And CBD downregulates the ID1 gene, and that's one of the mechanisms of CBD being effective as an anti-cancer agent. But THC binds to cannabinoid receptor 1, CB1, and CB2. Both of those receptors have been identified in tumor cells. Sometimes most of the time it's predominantly CB1, but sometimes there's also CB2. And there are some tumors that have been found to respond differently depending upon which receptor is activated. So in one tumor that I can't tell you exactly which one, but there is a tumor where CB1 stimulation stimulates the tumor to grow, and CB2 stimulation stimulates the tumor to shrink. So if you use THC, you're going to hit both CB1 and CB2, and there's no way of knowing which is going to be predominant. Now, I talk about one patient in the book who was not able to take THC and had a tumor that was reported to have CB2 receptors. And we used beta caryophyllene, which is an agonist of the CB2 receptor, but doesn't affect the CB1 receptor. Beta caryophyllene is a terpene that is found in many cannabis plants, but it's also found from other sources, namely black pepper, copaiba, oregano, rosemary, all of those things. So we used this was Maura Gordon's genius. She said, let's try to use CB2 agonists to treat this tumor, and it was effective using just spices high in beta caryophyllene. But there are other ways that THC and CBD affect tumor growth. One is they can downgrade a factor that stimulates blood vessel growth. And the tumor to grow needs to have extra blood vessels to get the nutrition required. So cannabinoids can block that blood vessel stimulation effect and help kill the tumors. There are other biochemical ways that are in the TRP receptor line that cannabinoids can affect tumor growth. So there's about a half a dozen different mechanisms by which cannabis can retard tumor growth.
Well, cannabis has been studied my whole life, and it's always been a Schedule I drug, which means that it's very difficult to study here in the United States. Most applications, as you probably know, for cannabis have been turned down over the years. So this new information hasn't really, it's on the cutting edge now, even though cannabis has been studied so intensely. Are there any new studies that are underway to talk about these anti-cancer properties?
Well, the federal government has just increased the allotment for the amount of cannabis that can be produced for research purposes. So that aspect is gearing up. The rescheduling from Schedule I to Schedule III, which has been proposed by the FDA, will lessen the restrictions on cannabis research also. But I'm not a big, I think it should be descheduled. I think Schedule III is only going to create, it's going to solve some problems, but it's going to create new problems. It's going to be hard anyway, it needs to be descheduled. And throughout the book, I demonize Schedule I, and I tell the whole story of how that came to be in the book, because I think it's important for people to know that it was the work of Harry Anslinger and Richard Nixon that put this curse on us with Schedule I of cannabis.
I've been doing this show for a long time, Dr. Joe, and this, I think, is show 1170 or something like that. But we had a show 666, and in our show 666, I named the 6 most evil people in the history of cannabis prohibition, and both Harry Anslinger and Richard Nixon were there at the top of that list. But we know now that cannabis is useful. Is there, how do people get hold of your book, first of all, The Cannabis Connection? That's one thing to touch on. You got this new book.
The Cannabis Cancer Connection is available on Amazon exclusively. It's been #1 in new medical research for the past couple of weeks, and that's the way to get it. You can buy a Kindle a version and a softcover version.
Mm-hmm. So you were a cardiologist practicing for many years. You know, you and I both are from Dallas, Texas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I grew up in Dallas and Garland, and I was there as a 3-year-old on November 22nd, 1963. But you were an intern at Parkland Hospital that day. And I know a new movie is about to come out on Paramount Plus that interviews the doctors, 7 doctors, who were there in the ER the day they brought in John F. Kennedy. And I am a deep researcher of the Kennedy assassination. I think the 2 best books on it out there are James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable, and David Talbot's The Devil's Chessboard. And I know that when the body of JFK was taken from ER, it was basically taken against Texas law by the Secret Service to DC. And what the DC autopsy showed was not what your associates and you saw in the ER. I understand you helped do the tracheotomy on JFK.
Right. I was a 4th-year medical student, not an intern. I was the most junior person in the room. My professors and teachers were the main doctors, and I was sort of the gopher. But I did see the wound in his neck and observe the. I didn't do any cutting, but I did actually look in the wound, and I was right there looking over the shoulder as the tracheostomy was performed. And this documentary on that's going to show on Paramount Plus on November 14th. I understand it's a 3-part series, and the first part will be on November the 14th. Covers the issue of what happened to the body after it left Parkland. And we discuss the interview that will be in this documentary on Paramount Plus. It's called "What the Doctor Saw," and in fact, I'm going to have to activate. I have Paramount Plus on my Roku, but I don't have a subscription, and I'm going to have to activate. I'm going to wait till the day before to activate my free trial. Anyway, they go. So the film that they're going to show of the reunion of the 7 physicians who were in Trauma Room 1, that was filmed originally in 2013 for the 50th anniversary of the assassination, but the film has wasn't aired back then, and I'm really pleased that it's going to show now, and so yeah, I have more hair and a little button in the film. I saw the trailer the other day, and the producer of that original interview over the past 10 years has done additional work and added in some of the aspects on what might have happened to the body after it left Parkland. So that's going to be covered. I think it's going to be a very informative presentation. I know there's some other documentaries that are going to show in this 60th anniversary period, but I think that this one may be the best of the lot. Um,
Yeah, I am outraged that they haven't released all those documents. You know, Trump could have done it, but he didn't. Biden could have done it, but he didn't. And so there's still hidden documents here 60 years later. It's pretty clear that uh, the body that ended up for the autopsy at Bethesda in Maryland had been radically altered before that actual autopsy. And some of the people in that performed that autopsy, well, they didn't have any history of doing autopsies before. They brought in amateur doctors to do it, and some of them are dead. They died violently. And I know one of them in particular was going to do a CBS interview the next day after he retired from the Navy, and they claim he jumped out of a window. And there were many, many different people apparently that were killed. I know one of the doctors that's in that interview with you was told, "Don't say anything about this, or you could be killed."
yeah, the word on that came out at Parkland back in 1963 was "Don't talk about this." So uh, I did not speak of my being in that room until I didn't mention it to anyone until about 1993 or 94, when one of the guys that has written a couple of books about the assassination, Bill Sloan. I don't know if you know his books.
I've heard the name. I don't think I've read his book though.
He's written several books. So he contacted me. He saw a list online, I guess, or someplace that said I was in the room. And so he contacted me and asked me to tell my story. And I initially said no, I didn't want to do it. But I was working on a book at the time, and I was stuck, and I didn't know how to go. So I made a deal with Bill Sloan that if I gave him my interview, he being a professional writer and me being an amateur writer, he would help me get my book off the ground. So we made that deal, and I told my story, and it is a chapter in one of his books. And he's got a picture of me from my graduation in 1964 from UT Southwestern that's at the top of the page. And but after it was all over and I gave him the interview, it turned out he couldn't help me at all because he didn't know anything about what I was writing about. And so, but that really broke the ice. That was the first time that I was willing to tell my story. And I've told it maybe a dozen times, maybe a few more, but not much more uh, since that 1994 interview. But back in the day, in the couple of years after the assassination, there were a lot of people that died unexpectedly, and that's part of why I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to be associated with it because I was afraid that something bad might happen. And um, um,
My
it,
stepfather married my mother on November 21st,
uh,
1963. And he was an executive for the Texas Pacific Railway, which controlled the overpass there at Dealey Plaza. He died in an explosion in a barber shop at about 1 a.m. back in 1970. And when I went to school in China and imported hemp paper and hemp fabric for about a decade. And while I was going to school there was an article on the front page of the People's Daily talking about how a police officer had been involved in killing another police officer, and that all the people that knew about this had been killed in fire bombings in that period of time, 1970, 71. So that led me to do more research, and that's why I became a real buff and am very, very knowledgeable on this. But I think it's quite possible that my stepfather was also murdered in the cover-up. There's a book out there by the late comedian and actor Richard Belzer called Hit List. And he lists 50 different people who died mysteriously that were witnesses to the assassination. And he said that the odds of this number of people dying in murders and mysteriously was like 165 trillion to 1. And obviously the government's got something to hide. When you were there, was it clear that the bullet wound in the neck was from the front?
Well, I tell this, I think I tell this story in the documentary. I don't remember, it's been over 10 years since that interview took place, but I saw the hole, but I had no training in ballistics at the time. So it did not, entrance exit wound did not register for me as a fourth year medical student. It was only a couple of years later, when I was in the Army, I was stationed in the Dominican Republic. There was an uprising in 1965, and the Organization of American States went into the Dominican Republic, and I was sent there as the chief of preventive medicine for the U.S. forces. Now, there was a Dominican that was shot by an MP, and the Dominicans were claiming that he was shot in the back, and the MP said that this Dominican charged him and he shot him from the front. So the commander of the base said, we need to go down and examine that Dominican's body and see whether that's an entrance wound or an exit wound. And I was the only doctor at the hospital who spoke Spanish. So I was nominated for that, to go down into the barrio where the rebels were and examine the body. It was a little bit frightening to go down there. And I had to wear my .45 and a shoulder holster because you had to, if you went out off the base, you had to be armed. And so I had to go down there, and I had no idea what was going to happen. But before I went down, I said to the commander, I don't know the difference between an entrance and an exit wound. So I got a crash course in the characteristics of entrance and exit wounds from the commanding officer of the base. And I went down, and the Dominican was lying on ice, and they were mourning and grieving. And I had to ask him to turn him over so I could see the back and look at the front. In fact, he was shot from behind. He was shot in the back, and the soldier who did it was subsequently court-martialed for that. But that's when I learned about entrance and exit wounds, and at that time it dawned on me that that was an entrance wound. I had never had that thought before because I just didn't know. I didn't know enough to make that determination. But it's not irrefutable that that's an entrance wound, because with high-powered ballistics, with bullets that are fired from a high-powered rifle, they move through the tissue so fast. The reason that an exit wound is bigger than the entrance wound is because of the speed at which the missile is moving through soft tissue. But with a high-powered rifle, the exit wound can be at a very high velocity and can resemble an entrance wound. So it's not unequivocal that wound is an entrance wound. It could have been an exit wound. Now the size is, my memory is, it's not too bad for 85, but it's not as good as it used to be. But that hole was somewhere between a dime and a quarter in size. I don't know, probably a little bit bigger than a nickel. And so I remember seeing the hole. It had smooth edges, which would have made it more likely an entrance wound. And one of the things uh, that I would have done differently, or could have done differently, but didn't do, is they took and at the hole they extended it and made the tracheostomy from that hole, which destroyed the evidence. So once it got to Bethesda, they could not tell what that wound was because the tracheostomy was right there. But it was my opinion when I looked in that hole that was opened up with a retractor or some surgical instrument, that you could have just put the tracheostomy tube right in the hole, and there was no real need to cut. But I being the most junior person in the room, and these were my seniors who were running the show, I did not speak up and say, all you have to do is put the tube in. There's an interesting story. I won't tell that other story about how I spent the morning of November 22nd, uh, between the time that I arrived at the hospital and the time the page came out. For the first page I heard on the intercom at Parkland was Dr. Clark, Dr. Kemp Clark. He was the chief of neurosurgery, and they paged Dr. Tom Shires, who was the chief of surgery, both. And I reacted to to those pages because I was on neurosurgery, and so I was reacted in behalf of Dr. Clark. Uh, but I'm not going to tell that story now.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
for
I
all
think
the
it may.
who don't know, I will just say that the conclusion by probably some co-conspirators, Alan Dulles being one of them, of the Warren Commission, was that Lee Harvey Oswald did it by himself from a window that was definitely behind the place where Kennedy was shot. And so the fact that bullets came from the front completely discredit that theory that Lee Harvey Oswald did it alone. Oswald said he was a patsy, and I think that's probably the truth. He was set up for this. And the fact that that bullet wound in the neck happened was probably an entrance wound. There was also a bullet hole in the front windshield that obviously had come from the front. And so they took that presidential limousine to Dearborn, Michigan the next day and threw the window away and completely cleaned out that car and remodeled it so that there was no evidence there. Obviously, a lot of people in the government had to be colluding to be able to pull off something like that, to take the car the president was killed at and erase all the evidence at the Ford factory the next day. And some of the people at the Ford factory admitted, that was a window had been shot from the front. And then the kill shot with Kennedy seemed to come from the front and blow out the back. What's your
Well, you have to watch the documentary because we discussed that,
Yeah.
and the surgeons who are more not. I played a little bit of devil's advocate about what the wound and the head wound looked like, and I said, how could that come from the back? And one of the doctors defended that it came from the back, but it didn't make sense to me what I saw. And so that's discussed in the documentary. I feel certain they didn't leave that on the cutting room floor. So I'm looking forward to watching it myself.
All right. Well, I'll be watching it too, as you know. So let's get back to cannabis just a little bit here, since that's
Okay.
the point here. So it seems that more than one cannabinoid is more effective. And I notice you talk about that in your book, and we've touched on it briefly here. Do you want to expand on that any?
Yeah, well, the most research is on THC, and I think it's important, but I think some of the I don't know what the dose of THC is. If you look at some of the graphs of dose response curves of THC to cancer cells in Dr. Mary's research, you see that some tumors are sensitive to very low doses of THC, and other tumors you have to get pretty high on the THC dose to be effective. So some of those, but when THC works, it works at relatively common doses. I've seen people that have needed to go to more than 100 milligrams of THC a day to get results. The lowest dose that I have seen be effective in making the cancer cells shrink is about 40 milligrams of THC. So what I say, and I've seen some people who got up to 100 milligrams, their life was miserable. They couldn't really function, and they still died, and they lost precious time with their family because they were incapacitated by the THC trying to kill the cancer. So I take a slightly different approach in the book, and I recommend that people use THC at the highest tolerable dose, the highest dose that they can tolerate. And I describe in detail how to get there, what to do to achieve the highest tolerable, what your highest tolerable dose is will change as you develop tolerance to THC. So I have details on how to start low and go up slowly. And once you reach your highest tolerable dose, you hold at that level for a few days or even a few weeks, and then try to go higher. And most of the time you can go higher. And I describe how to do that and what are the signs that you've reached your highest tolerable dose. So I don't now, because I've seen the utility of CBD and CBG for many tumors, and CBDA and THCA and even CBGA has some anti-neoplastic activity for some tumors, because these can be taken at relatively high doses, several hundred milligrams a day, without becoming problematic. And so I've changed my whole recommendation. Go to the highest tolerable dose of THC, whatever that is, and those other cannabinoids that have been shown to be effective against those tumors, you can take it 200, 300, or even more milligrams a day, depending upon the tumor and how much you can afford, because cannabis isn't cheap. A couple hundred milligrams of a couple hundred milligrams a day of CBD is costs a pretty penny. So I go through all of that in the book, and it's not just one cannabinoid. And I believe as far as cancer goes, so Dr. Christina Sanchez did an experiment in her 2018 study where she took THC isolate and added the 5 terpenes that were most prevalent in the full extract that she was using, and compared the THC isolate plus the 5 terpenes, and found that there was no additional benefit by adding the 5 terpenes. And so at the CanMed 2018 panel on cannabis and cancer that I moderated, I asked her if she thought that the entourage effect, and Dr. Russo was also on this panel, so was Dr. Mary. So I asked Dr. Sanchez if she thought the entourage effect was not the terpenes, but the other cannabinoids. And she answered yes. And Dr. Russo didn't protest. So I think we have to broaden our definition of what the entourage effect is. It's not just terpenes, it's everything that's in the plant.
The other cannabinoids, most.
The other cannabinoids, the flavonoids, there are a number of flavonoids in the cannabis plant that have shown antineoplastic activity: luteolin, quercetin, and there are 2 flavonoids that are unique to cannabis: cannaflavin A and cannaflavin B. Both cannaflavin A has shown antineoplastic activity, and a derivative of cannaflavin B has shown antineoplastic activity. So there's lots of stuff in the plant that has the potential to help. I have had one patient that used CBD isolate because he couldn't afford to buy the full extract, and he was successful using CBD isolate. So it's not a, the ideal is to use a plant-derived full extract oil of both the CBG products and the CBD products, as well as the THC varieties. So, that's
we are now out of time. I know you also say inhalation is not the best route of administration. It should be taken orally or as a suppository.
Well, I talk about all of that in the book. I do cite the experience of one cannabis nurse who had a couple of patients who were able to shrink their tumors by dabbing. And I don't advocate that because the high heat is going to create toxins as well. And I have a whole chapter on suppositories.
The part about dabbing. I haven't got up to the suppository part, though we do know some people who specialize in that. We are out of time, so I've got to cut it off there. I'd love to have you back at some point as a guest. You have this great book out there, The Cannabis Cancer Connection. You can get that on Amazon. This is Dr. Joe Goldstrich. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Doctor?
No, it's been a pleasure, Paul. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for doing it. I really appreciate it. Keep working and help restore hemp. Good night.
Okay. All right. Will do.